Sir, you will need to move. This seat is not meant for people like you. The words echoed in the quiet, luxurious first-class cabin of Skylux Airlines Flight 782 from New York to San Francisco. Lauren Hayes, the lead flight attendant, stood stiffly by row 2. Her arms crossed in authority. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held the cold arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. Elias Thorne looked up slowly from his tablet. He was a tall, sharply dressed black man in his early 40s. His eyes, calm but piercing, met Lauren's gaze without fear. He had heard those words before, not in exactly the same setting perhaps, but the message had always been the same. You do not belong. Once, as a boy in Atlanta, he had been told he could not use the public swimming pool. As a college student, he had been followed by security guards in luxury stores. Even early in his career, he had been overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside, but that had been years ago. Elias Thorne was no longer the boy who had been denied a swim or the young man watched with suspicion. He was now the founder and CEO of Thorne Tech Solutions, one of the most successful artificial intelligence firms in the world, valued at over $3 billion. What Lauren Hayes did not know, or had chosen to ignore, was that Elias was not just another passenger in seat A. He was the man Skylux Airlines had spent months courting for a $50 million technology contract to upgrade their outdated customer service system, a system designed to prevent the very kind of bias she was now enforcing. But at this moment, none of that mattered. All she saw was a black man occupying a seat she believed was reserved for someone else. "I'm sorry," Lauren repeated, her professional smile tightening into something much less friendly. "This seat is reserved for one of our elite passengers. Mrs. Victoria Evans always sits here. She has requested her usual seat today." Elias calmly set down his tablet. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced both his boarding pass and his platinum membership card. "This is my assigned seat. 2A. Passengers nearby paused. Some lowered their books. Others exchanged glances. A few, sensing the tension, discreetly pulled out their phones and started recording. Before Lauren could respond, Brad Collins, the cabin supervisor, arrived, tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly irritated. He stepped beside Lauren and gave Elias a quick, dismissive glance. "We can arrange another seat for you, sir," Brad said. "Something more suitable." He didn't say the words out loud, but the meaning was clear. Somewhere out of sight, somewhere less visible, somewhere more fitting for someone like you. Elias's jaw tightened. "This is my assigned seat," he said firmly. "I will not move." From the aisle, a sharp voice cut through the growing murmurs. Victoria Evans, dressed in a flawless Chanel dress and clutching an expensive handbag, stepped forward. She was in her early 50s, her face painted with polished disdain. "I always sit here," Victoria declared, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "It's practically my seat. Surely you understand that social position is not negotiable." Lauren nodded in agreement. "Sir, please cooperate. We would hate to escalate this further." Elias took a slow breath. The air in the cabin had changed. Passengers were no longer just curious, they were expectant. Some avoided his eyes. Others watched intently, their phones still recording. He knew this feeling. He had felt it his entire life, being judged not by his accomplishments, but by the color of his skin, being told, subtly or directly, that he did not belong. But this time was different. He was not a young man seeking approval or acceptance. He was a leader, a man responsible for thousands of employees, a man who understood power and influence, and he was not about to back down. "I will not give up my seat," Elias replied steadily. "I purchased this ticket. I am a platinum member. This is my seat." A silence spread across the cabin. Even those trying to appear uninterested could feel the tension snapping taut like a cable under strain. Brad leaned in close to Lauren. Though he spoke softly, Elias clearly heard the words. "Force him." Lauren's smile disappeared. She straightened and gave a slight nod. Within moments, 2 security officers boarded the plane, moving quickly down the aisle toward Elias's seat. Passengers gasped. Several phones lifted higher. The recording continued. The world was watching now, though the flight crew didn't yet realize how much that would matter. As the officers approached, Elias quietly gathered his briefcase. He stood without argument, his head high, his back straight. He had spent a lifetime preparing for moments like this. "I will leave voluntarily," he said calmly. "But know this, you've just made the biggest mistake of your careers." Lauren smirked. Brad crossed his arms. Victoria smiled triumphantly. They believed they had won. They had no idea the storm they had just unleashed. Elias Thorne walked calmly down the jet bridge, the eyes of dozens of passengers burning into his back. The security officers flanked him but made no attempt to touch him. Even they seemed to sense that something was different about this man. He wasn't shouting or arguing. His quiet composure made the entire situation feel even heavier. In the terminal, Elias paused near gate 12. He placed his briefcase carefully by his side and pulled out his phone. Passengers streamed past him, some whispering, some filming. A few even looked at him with sympathy, though none had spoken up on board. He opened his camera app, held the phone steady, and calmly began recording a statement. "My name is Elias Thorne. I was removed from my assigned seat in Skylux Airlines first class, despite holding a valid ticket and platinum membership. I was told the seat was not meant for people like me. This is my official documentation of the incident." As he spoke, a young woman approached, clutching her phone. She had been seated across the aisle and had recorded the entire confrontation. "I have the whole thing," she said quietly. "From the moment the flight attendant told you to move until they forced you off the plane. And I caught something else." She pulled up her video. In the clip, Victoria Evans could be seen slipping a folded bill into the cabin supervisor Brad Collins' pocket just before Elias was escorted out. "I thought it was weird at the time," the woman added. "Now it's clear, they were bribed." Elias nodded once. "Please send me the footage and keep a copy for yourself." She typed her number into his phone, trembling slightly. "What they did was wrong. If you need me to testify, I will." Elias thanked her, his voice calm but resolute. He had witnessed many injustices in his lifetime, but this was different. This wasn't just personal, this was systemic. A clear abuse of power, recorded by multiple witnesses, and soon the entire world would see it. He turned and made another call. "Elise, activate the legal team. Prepare the PR response. We need to move fast." Elise Thompson, his chief operating officer, answered immediately. She had worked with Elias for over a decade and understood the gravity in his tone. "Already on it. Our legal counsel is reviewing passenger rights and discrimination laws. Communications is drafting a statement, and social media alerts are tracking the incident. Multiple videos are already online." Elias nodded. "Good. Mobilize the shareholder team. I want them briefed." He disconnected and looked back toward the plane through the large terminal windows. He could still see the Skylux logo on the side of the aircraft, the same airline that had spent the last 6 months negotiating a $50 million contract with his company. They had wanted his technology to modernize their customer service. Instead, they had given him a first-hand example of the very bias his systems were designed to detect and prevent. The irony was staggering. Within 30 minutes, news of the incident began spreading online. The videos captured by multiple passengers showed not just Elias's calm resistance, but the blatant prejudice of the staff and the bribery. Hashtags like #SkyLuxDiscrimination and #JusticeForElias began trending. Celebrities, business leaders, and activists started amplifying the story. By the time Elias reached the private lounge where Elise and the legal team had gathered, the view count had crossed 1 million and it was climbing rapidly. Elise stood to greet him. "This is already a national story. Several major news outlets are requesting interviews." Elias shook his head. "Not yet. We let the video speak for itself first." No statements until the full picture is clear. The head of legal, Sarah Mendez, handed Elias a tablet. Preliminary legal analysis shows multiple violations: discrimination based on race, failure to honor a paid seat assignment, and possible fraud involving the bribe. We also have grounds for a shareholder lawsuit if necessary. Elias reviewed the report silently. He didn't feel anger, not yet. What he felt was a quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. He turned to Elise. Schedule a meeting with Skylux's executive board today and prepare to call an emergency shareholder assembly. Elise nodded, understood. As the team moved into action, Elias sat back for a moment, watching the flurry of activity. It was not the first time he had faced adversity, but never before had the stakes involved not just his dignity, but the culture of an entire industry. Brad Collins, Lauren Hayes, and Victoria Evans believed they had enforced their social order. They had removed a man they considered out of place. What they didn't know was that Elias Thorne was not just another passenger. He was their largest individual shareholder, and he had the power not only to challenge their injustice, but to transform the entire airline forever. At exactly 1:15 p.m., Elias Thorne entered the glass-walled boardroom at Skylux Airlines headquarters. He walked with the quiet authority of a man who understood power, not the power of wealth alone, but the power of purpose. Behind him followed Elise Thompson, his coup, Sarah Mendez from legal, and two more senior advisors. The boardroom, usually a place of controlled, rehearsed corporate discussions, now felt like a courtroom. Skylux's CEO, Richard Williams, sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the airline CFO, chief legal officer, and several board members. The room was unusually crowded. PR representatives, a few senior department heads, and legal assistants stood along the walls. On a large screen at the far end of the room, a paused video displayed the now infamous scene: Lauren Hayes standing over Elias in seat-A, Brad Collins at her side, and Victoria Evans glaring down in judgment. The video had already been viewed more than 18 million times. Major news outlets had replayed it hourly. Social media boiled with outrage. Investors had begun to call. And most importantly, the stock price had plummeted 14% in a single morning. Williams stood to greet Elias, his face pale, his usual boardroom confidence worn thin. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for agreeing to meet so quickly," Williams began, his voice tight. "I want to start by expressing our deepest apologies." "I'm not here for apologies," Elias interrupted. His tone was calm, but the finality in his words silenced the entire room. "Let's address the facts." He placed his tablet on the table and connected it to the screen. The paused video disappeared, replaced by a presentation titled, "Systemic Failure, Skylux Airlines Case Study." Gasps rippled through the room. Elise nodded slightly. The entire board knew this was no ordinary passenger complaint. Elias had come prepared for far more than just a personal grievance. First, Elias began, "Your staff violated federal anti-discrimination laws by removing me from a paid, assigned seat on the basis of race and social bias." He clicked to the next slide. It showed a timeline of the incident, complete with video stills and transcripts. Second, your employees accepted a bribe from another passenger to enforce that discrimination. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. Sarah Mendez leaned forward. Our legal team has confirmed that bribery and racial discrimination in a commercial aviation context exposes Skylux to both civil and criminal liability. A board member cleared his throat nervously, but said nothing. Third, Elias continued, "This was not an isolated incident. We've gathered reports and testimony from multiple passengers detailing similar discriminatory treatment on Skylux flights. My technology team has also reviewed 6 months of customer feedback data from public sources. The pattern is undeniable." He advanced the slide. A bar graph appeared showing disparities in seat reassignments, complaint rates, and service quality. All disproportionately affecting passengers of color. By now, Richard Williams looked like he had aged 10 years in a single hour. Finally, Elias said, "This incident threatens the very survival of Skylux Airlines." He paused. "You've already lost 14% of your market value. Financial analysts predict further declines. Advertisers are pulling back. Consumer advocacy groups are mobilizing boycotts." Williams tried to interject. "We're taking steps to." Elias held up a hand. "Your steps will not be enough. The public doesn't believe corporate statements anymore. They believe actions. Visible, measurable, accountable." Silence gripped the room. Even the PR head, who had a notebook filled with talking points, remained frozen. Sarah Mendez added, "If corrective action isn't taken immediately, lawsuits will follow. Investors may seek to recover losses. Federal regulators will intervene." Elias let the weight of that statement settle before continuing. "As Skylux's largest individual shareholder, holding just under 27% when combined with my strategic partners, I am invoking my right to call an emergency shareholder vote." Whispers broke out around the table. One board member muttered to another, "He's not bluffing." "I propose the following actions," Elias said, clicking to the final slide. 1. Immediate termination of the 3 employees involved, Lauren Hayes, Brad Collins, and Captain Reynolds. 2. Permanent ban of Victoria Evans from all Skylux services. 3. Full public admission of discriminatory practices, with a binding commitment to implement bias elimination protocols developed by Thorn Tech Solutions. 4. A mandatory company-wide suspension of service for 48 hours to conduct intensive equity and ethics training. 5. Formation of an independent passenger equity board with enforcement powers to audit compliance and issue penalties, the CFO blanched. A 48-hour suspension would cost millions, potentially tens of millions. Elias looked at him steadily. "And what would a 30% stock drop cost you? Or a class action lawsuit? Or government sanctions?" Williams rubbed his forehead. "Your demands are severe." "No," Elias corrected him. "They are just. The severity came from your employees' actions, not my response." A tense pause followed. Then Elise spoke for the first time. Skylux approached. "Thorn Tech Solutions for a $50 million contract to modernize your customer experience platform. That contract is suspended indefinitely until these conditions are met. Additionally, Thorn Tech and its partners will reevaluate their investments based on your response today." The room shifted. Suddenly, this was not a negotiation. It was a test of Skylux's willingness to survive or collapse. Richard Williams swallowed hard. He turned to the other board members. "I recommend we accept Mr. Thorn's terms." One by one, reluctant but resigned, the board nodded. Elias closed the presentation. "Then we proceed." By 3 p.m., a formal statement was released. Skylux announced the terminations, the passenger ban, and the adoption of Thorn Tech's anti-discrimination program. The company also pledged $25 million to support diversity and inclusion efforts industry-wide. That evening, news outlets reported the outcome as a turning point for corporate accountability. But Elias wasn't done. He convened a second, smaller meeting with Skylux's HR and legal departments. Elise and Sarah joined him. "We need to address the broader culture that allowed this to happen," Elias said. "Firing 3 people won't fix that." He outlined a comprehensive review of Skylux's hiring, promotion, and customer service policies. Thorn Tech's AI tools would analyze patterns of bias. Employees who had raised previous concerns about discrimination would be invited to share their experiences confidentially. "This won't be easy," Elise admitted. "It will expose uncomfortable truths." "It has too," Elias replied. "Otherwise, this will happen again," the airline agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, they began implementing the changes. Lauren Hayes, Brad Collins, and Captain Reynolds were escorted from the premises that same afternoon. Security cameras captured their departure. The same social order they had enforced against Elias had now turned on them. Victoria Evans received a lifetime ban and a legal notice informing her of pending charges related to bribery and attempted fraud. Meanwhile, Thorn Tech's monitoring tools went live inside Skylux's customer service operations. For the first time in the airline's history, data was being used not to defend the company's image, but to hold it accountable. Passengers noticed the change. Within days, social media began sharing news stories not of discrimination, but of unexpected fairness, flight attendants intervening when passengers were mistreated, supervisors stepping in to ensure fair seating. The tone of travel began to shift, and behind it all stood Elias Thorn. His quiet defiance in C2A had become more than a viral moment, it had become a movement. By the end of the month, Skylux's stock stabilized. Some investors returned. Others praised the company's transparency and willingness to reform. But the real victory was cultural. The airline had not just apologized, it had changed. And it all began because one man refused to give up his seat. 2 days after the boardroom reckoning, Skylux Airlines entered uncharted territory. At precisely 6 a.m., every Skylux flight was grounded not by weather, not by technical failures, but by a decision made at the highest level. A decision that would cost millions in lost revenue, but might just save the airline's future. All 12,000 Skylux employees, pilots, cabin crews, customer service agents, corporate managers were required to attend a mandatory training program titled Equity in Action. The Thorn Tech Initiative. The suspension made headlines worldwide. CNN, CNBC, and the New York Times reported on the unprecedented move. Some commentators called it corporate suicide. Others called it the most courageous stand for accountability in the airline industry's history. At Skylux's New York Training Center, employees arrived in waves. Some wore anxious expressions. Others were skeptical, arms crossed in silent defiance. Still others looked quietly relieved, as if they had been waiting for the company to finally confront its hidden rot. In the largest conference hall, Elias Thorn stood before them, no longer the passenger humiliated in C2A. Today, he was the architect of their new future. He didn't speak from a stage elevated above them. He stood at floor level, eye to eye with the very people whose actions or inaction had nearly destroyed both his dignity and their airline. Let's be clear. Elias began, his voice steady but resonant. This isn't about punishing 3 people. It's about understanding how a culture of silence, bias, and fear allowed injustice to happen. The room was silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on him. What happened to me could have happened to anyone. And it does, every day, to people without money, without power, without anyone to record the video or call a board meeting. This time, the only difference was that you underestimated the wrong person. A few heads lowered. Others nodded slowly. Skylux can't fix what it won't face. So today, we're going to face it. The first training module was unlike any corporate video seminar they had ever seen. Developed by Thorn Tech's Behavioral Psychology Division, it immersed participants in real-world customer scenarios. Actors recreated the incident from Flight 782, not just Elias's experience, but those of countless anonymous passengers whose stories had gone unheard. Employees watched from the point of view of those passengers, experiencing how it felt to be judged at the ticket counter, to be ignored at the gate, to be removed from a seat because of skin color or perceived social status. Some employees wept openly, others shifted uncomfortably, realizing for the first time that what they had dismissed as routine protocol was often discrimination in disguise. During one exercise, a young flight attendant named Melissa stood up. "I remember that flight," she said, her voice trembling. "I was working economy class. I didn't know what was happening in first class at the time. But I've seen things like this. I didn't speak up. I was afraid." Elias nodded. "And that's exactly why this program isn't just for those who made the worst choices. It's for everyone who was ever made to feel that speaking up would cost them their job. Elise Thompson added, "From this day forward, your silence will never be demanded. It will never be rewarded. Skylux will protect employees who challenge bias, not punish them." The message rippled through the room. In the afternoon, another module introduced Skylux's new passenger equity assurance protocol. Every customer complaint would now be reviewed using Thorn Tech's AI tools to detect patterns of bias. Supervisors would no longer have the final say without independent review. If employees spotted discrimination, they were empowered, no, expected to intervene. For the first time, equity wasn't just a corporate slogan. It was measurable, enforceable, mandatory. Meanwhile, news of Skylux's transformation spread beyond airline industry circles. Civil rights organizations applauded the reforms. Major investors who had considered pulling out began to cautiously return. Elias, however, remained focused not on the headlines, but on the human stories unfolding inside those training rooms. During a break, a baggage handler approached him hesitantly. His name tag read, "Luis." "Mr. Thorne," Luis said softly, "I'm not management or cabin crew. I don't usually deal with passengers, but I've seen how people like me, Latino, working class, get treated when we try to fly. I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for standing up for yourself, but for standing up for all of us." Elias clasped the man's shoulder. "It's not just me standing anymore. It's all of us." That evening, after 12 hours of intensive sessions, the first day of training concluded. Hundreds of employees lingered in the lobby, not because they were required to stay, but because they were processing what they had learned. For some, the change had just begun. For others, it was already life-altering. As Elias watched them, he knew that cultural shifts didn't happen overnight. Mistakes would still be made. Bias didn't vanish with a single training or a corporate memo. But today, something rare had occurred. The first thread of silence had been broken. The first ripple of accountability had spread, and the man once told, "You don't belong here," now stood at the center of a room filled with people willing to challenge that lie. The journey was far from over, but it had begun. By the end of the third day of training, the changes at Skylux Airlines were no longer theoretical. They were visible, tangible, and for some, deeply personal. While the majority of employees embraced the new standards, 3 individuals were summoned to face a reckoning of their own. In a plain conference room on the 12th floor of Skylux headquarters, Lauren Hayes, Brad Collins, and Victoria Evans sat at a long table. No champagne, no authority, no audience to applaud them, only the company's HR director, general counsel, and the security officers. Lauren's once confident demeanor had crumbled. Her perfectly tailored uniform now seemed like a hollow costume. Brad, who once towered over passengers with a stern face and clipped authority, kept his eyes fixed on the table. Victoria Evans clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her manicured fingers trembling slightly. The HR director began without ceremony. After a thorough investigation, including multiple video recordings, employee testimonies, and data gathered by Thorn Tech's analytics team, we have concluded that each of you engaged in conduct that violated not only Skylux's policies, but also federal anti-discrimination laws. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Lauren Hayes, you used your authority as lead flight attendant to unjustly target a paying passenger based solely on race and appearance. You escalated a situation that should never have existed. Lauren opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound emerged. She knew there was no defense. Brad Collins, as cabin supervisor, you not only failed to protect the rights of our passenger, Mr. Elias Thorne, but also actively participated in enforcing an unjust removal. Evidence confirms you whispered, force him to your staff. That single decision will define your career. Brad flinched, shame overtaking his features. Finally, the HR director turned to Victoria. Mrs. Evans, as a frequent flyer, your platinum status offered privileges, not power to oppress. You bribed airline staff to displace another passenger. That act alone disqualifies you from flying with any commercial carrier under Skylux's new alliance policies. Victoria's face, once etched with entitlement, now displayed something rarer: fear. Effective immediately, the HR director continued. All three of you are permanently banned from Skylux Airlines and its global partners. Your employment, she glanced at Lauren and Brad, is terminated. Mrs. Evans, your privileges are revoked. Additionally, your actions have been reported to federal authorities. Civil litigation is pending. A heavy silence followed. Security officers stepped forward. Please gather your belongings. Lauren's tears came first, silent at first, then uncontrollable sobs. Brad stood slowly, face ashen. Victoria remained seated for a moment longer, as if believing she could reverse the decision by sheer will, but even she understood the era of silent complicity was over. As they were led out, passing rows of employees who now understood the cost of unchecked bias, no one looked away. No one whispered in sympathy. Accountability was not cruelty. It was justice. Later, that afternoon, Elias Thorne convened a smaller meeting in a different conference room. This time, the atmosphere was different. Cautious hope had replaced tension. Representatives from Skylux's Employee Equity Council, newly formed and diverse in every sense, sat alongside Elias, Elise Thompson, and the CEO, Richard Williams. The meeting wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration. We've begun receiving reports from passengers noticing improved service, Elise noted. Even those unaware of the incident have commented on the professionalism and courtesy of Skylux staff. A young flight attendant named Melissa, who had spoken up during training, now sat on the council. The biggest change is that we know leadership will back us if we challenge bias. That wasn't always the case. Elias nodded. Culture isn't changed by firing people. It's changed when the silent majority finds its voice. Richard Williams leaned forward. Elias, the public wants to know if you believe Skylux has earned back your trust and your investment. Elias paused, choosing his words carefully. Trust is not a statement, it's a process. You're making progress, but it can't stop here. He produced a document. I propose we formalize the Passenger Equity Assurance Protocol into the company's bylaws, make it permanent, not subject to changing leadership or market pressures. The council members nodded in agreement. Consider it done, Williams said. And Elias, thank you. Not just for holding us accountable, but for helping us become better. As the meeting adjourned, Elias glanced out the conference room's glass walls. On the tarmac beyond, Skylux jets stood ready for their next journeys. They no longer represented just a mode of transportation. They had become symbols of a company willing to confront its failures and chart a new course. What began as a humiliation had sparked a transformation, and the man once told he didn't belong now helped shape a company where everyone would. 6 months had passed since Elias Thorne was ordered to leave CTA. 6 months since the viral video that rocked an airline and forced an industry to face its silent prejudices. What began as a moment of humiliation had become the catalyst for sweeping, measurable change. Skylux Airlines was no longer the company it had been. It wasn't just about new policies or clever marketing. The change ran deeper. Passengers noticed it first, small but undeniable shifts. Flight attendants addressed every passenger by name, regardless of appearance or class of ticket. Complaints were no longer dismissed but reviewed by an independent oversight committee. Thorne Tech's AI systems monitored service patterns, identifying disparities before they became crises. Employee satisfaction climbed to its highest level in a decade. Staff who had once feared retaliation for speaking up now felt empowered to challenge bias. Even the hiring process changed, focusing not just on skills but also on empathy, cultural competency, and ethical decision-making. But perhaps the most remarkable shift was cultural. During one flight from San Francisco to Atlanta, a young black woman approached a flight attendant nervously. She had heard stories of discrimination in the skies and feared what might happen if any issues arose with her seat. The attendant smiled. "We're here to serve every passenger with dignity, ma'am. That's not just my promise, it's company policy now." The woman relaxed, reassured not by empty words, but by real, observable actions. Meanwhile, Elias Thorne watched the transformation not from the headlines, but from the data. His team at Thorne Tech continuously audited Skylex's performance, and, when discrepancies emerged, as they inevitably would in any large system, they were addressed transparently. Elias's commitment wasn't to perfection. It was to progress. One afternoon, Richard Williams invited Elias to Skylex's new employee training facility. What had once been a forgotten warehouse was now a vibrant center for education, storytelling, and equity training. On the wall near the entrance hung a plaque, in honor of those who refused to surrender their seat, and those who refused to surrender the fight for fairness. Elias stood quietly for a moment, reading the words, his reflection staring back at him from the polished metal. "You didn't just change an airline," Williams said, approaching from behind. "You changed how we think about accountability." "I didn't do it alone," Elias replied. "I just refused to stay silent." The real work was done by those willing to listen. Outside the facility, a group of new flight attendants gathered for orientation. Their uniforms were fresh. Their faces reflected every shade of America. One trainee caught sight of Elias and whispered to a colleague, "That's him, the man from the video." But to them, Elias wasn't just a headline or a symbol. He was proof that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, could lead to real, lasting change. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias prepared to board a flight. Seat to A awaited him. But this time, it wasn't just a seat, it was a reminder. A reminder that progress is possible when silence is broken, that dignity is not given, it's claimed, and that sometimes, the journey toward justice begins at 30,000 feet. If this story moved you, show your support by hitting the like button. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We read everyone, and if you believe in fairness, dignity, and standing up against injustice, subscribe now for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can keep these conversations flying high.